Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
Common Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you live from these United States of America. I am in Winter Wonderland, Des Moines, Iowa, where I'm the Director of Mission and Ministry at Mercy College of Health Sciences and the Executive Vice President of the Newman Idea. You can check us out, mchs.edu and newmanidea.com. Bud, how are you doing out there in the land of French fries, Pittsburgh, America?
I'll trade you Wonderlands.
That's very ominous, Bud.
We haven't had a snow this year where the kids could actually sled.
Oh, yeah.
So it keeps like putting this layer of pixie dust on the ground, but no sledding material.
Well, that is interesting and sad. What I want to know is...
I'm warm right now, though. I'm sitting in the offices of the National Institute for Newman Studies, research library dedicated to the thought of John Henry Newman. So if you want to find more, newmanstudies.org.
Yeah, your kids, I've been there. They could actually probably sled down the steps of the Newman Institute if you really wanted to. Probably get in trouble. Speaking of, Bud, so we got to go sled, but that's really sort of a misnomer because we went to go sled. If people don't know this in Des Moines, like there's a golf course that really has like a few sort of hills that, you know, like are the sort of beginning of like green going into a blue. You can go pretty fast. It's not very long, of course, so I wouldn't suggest, you know, mounting up on skis or anything. Yeah. So we go and everybody's excited. And on the first trip down, one of my kids gets hurt. So sledding so far in 2020 for the Bonners has exactly consisted of one trip down a hill. No one broke anything, but I was sitting there looking down the hill being like, yep, this is going to be a great thing to go home and tell the wife about how I got a kid hurt right out of the gate.
When I was 15 years old, I had this huge crush on a girl named Mary Kate, and we were sledding down this huge hill and using inner tubes, which you can get some serious velocity with inner tubes. And I was too frightened to do it. Mary Kate's like, come on, bud, blah, 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 blah. So she finally convinced me, and we like started our inner tubes at the same time because that's romantic when you're 15. And on the trip down, Mary Kate broke her tailbone. So I was all freaking out and too scared, and then my crush broke her tailbone, and she was like out of commission for a month.
See, it's good to know that God reached into, you know, the verity of your life and broke another woman's tailbone to make sure that you ended up with Rachel. God was just watching out for you, man, because without Rachel, I don't know where you'd be today.
If you happen to break your tailbone, you know who you could potentially talk to?
Who?
Graduates of Mercy College.
I knew it. Alley-oop right there, mchs.edu, Mercy College. You're exactly right, but underwrites this show, and we want to thank them, and you're exactly right. There are probably people right now sitting in a classroom figuring out how to know whether said person, potential love interest that has been now vanquished from the vision of Bud, has a broken tailbone or not. mchs.edu to learn such wonderful, helpful things to affect the world in such a wonderful way.
Well, I was on that website recently, and you've lined up a pretty awesome speaker for the next Faith and Healing Series session.
That's right, Charles Camosi, and he's going to be on the show in a few weeks as well. But if you aren't doing anything on March 3rd, which is Tuesday, hey, even if you are doing something, cancel it, because Mercy College of Health Sciences is having our Faith and Healing speaker, Dr. Charles Camosi. March 3rd, festivities start at 6. Yes, at 6 o'clock at the Sullivan Center. You can go look about all of that on mchs.edu. Dr. Camosi's been on the show, and he will be back on, so he's an Uncommon Good all-star, but really can't speak highly enough about people needing to come and check out the talk.
Yeah, if I could circle back to sledding for one moment, maybe the reason why we haven't got sledding snow in Pittsburgh this year is because, Bo, you've visited recently. The hills are pretty daunting, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. If you got any sort of veneer of snow in Pittsburgh, there would be so many broken tailbones and like shins snapped in two. I was just in your car. I was worried about.
God maybe knows my children, raised in Iowa for the first parts of their lives. Like, they may not know the limits of sledding in Pittsburgh.
That's right. Like, and who knows what your deductible for health insurance is this year? So God's watching out for you. Today on the show, we have another Uncommon Good All-Star. Our good friend Julie Weldon is going to be on the show. So, Bud, the Feast of St. Thomas Aquinas was yesterday. A lot of different Newman centers named after Thomas Aquinas in the sort of general area up at Iowa State, over at Lincoln in Nebraska. But a lot of people, of course, not only have devotion to Thomas Aquinas, but he is a big imprint on this show. The common good itself, in sort of many ways that it's understood in Catholic social teaching, indelibly printed with Thomas Aquinas' philosophy behind it. Julie is a PhD candidate in nursing, and people will be surprised to know, I think, that Thomas Aquinas plays a central role in her understanding of how we talk about nursing. And so I just think it's a wonderful way to celebrate the week of Thomas Aquinas' feast, to talk about Thomas Aquinas, but also to sort of understand how he has practical rubber hitting the road implications for something that all of us run into, right? We've all been sick. We've all encountered nurses. Wouldn't it be interesting to see how Thomas Aquinas' theory of the human changes our understanding of human health? So human flourishing and nursing with Julie Weldon when we get back from the break. This is the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. We will be back right after this. The Uncommon Good, back with you today on this Wednesday. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr joining you today live. Thank you for listening here. KWKY, Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. In studio, we don't always get to have in-studio guests, but we're very happy to have in-studio Julie Weldon, our friend who's been on the show before. But I would have to say that if you live in Des Moines and you're not friends with Julie, you're really missing out, except maybe during baseball season. She's a Cubs fan, but stuff happens. Research and project manager at Mercy One Population Health, PhD candidate at Iowa University in nursing, and then also an adjunct professor at Mercy College of Health Sciences. Julie, welcome to the show and welcome to the studio.
Thanks for having me on the show today.
So last time we had to talk to you on the phone, and I think you were literally within half a mile, but it was a matter of timing. So we're glad that we're able to get you here and talk to you live. That makes it a lot more fun to have you in the studio.
I agree.
So we were talking about this a few weeks ago, that we would love to have you back on the show and on what occasion. And then we got the chance to talk about how much we love Thomas Aquinas, both of us. And then we were talking about, I sort of knew this, but you were bringing back up, of course, right, that Thomas Aquinas is playing a big role in your dissertation as a nursing candidate, getting a PhD in nursing. I guess real quick to ask you, when people go, oh, nurses get PhDs, what is exactly going on when you get a PhD in nursing? And how is it that something like Thomas Aquinas, which doesn't seem to have much to do with quote-unquote medicine, have such a role in academic work in nursing?
Well, a PhD in nursing really involves a research approach to nursing and how we can improve our practice and improve healthcare in general and improve patient outcomes. And Thomas Aquinas, when you think about it from an improvement perspective, I believe Thomas Aquinas really wanted to encourage us to improve our lives. And he talked about improving your life through flourishing. And so when I started looking at opportunities to improve nursing practice, improve patient outcomes, and improve the healthcare system in general, given my upbringing and my Catholic background and reading some of the various influences in our Catholic, moral theology and philosophy, I really, Thomas Aquinas' teaching really resonated with me and how he approached life and human nature and how to interact with people and how to improve your own life while you're trying to help others improve their life. And so I thought it went really well with what I was doing with nursing. So I wanted to use that as a theological and philosophical background for what I was working on.
Yeah, Julie, I got to say, I think about like what Bud and I have done research-wise and how few lives we've improved, Bud. So, Bud, I mean, if we're going to like make a baseball card of this, what's the stats on your improvement with your dissertation? Be honest. No, I'm kidding. But wouldn't you say that is a sort of stereotype about getting into the PhD world and writing a sort of academic paper is there's sort of an esoteric field that you need to run off to and find minutia about. So not only to think about how can we marshal the Catholic intellectual tradition to improve lives here and now, but the idea that we can do research into something like nursing, a social phenomenon that has a great outreach. I mean, who have you ever healed, Bud? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
No, fair enough. Yeah, that's challenge accepted. But Julie, as I think back to especially teaching at Mercy, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Like one thing that I think Bo and I ran into sometimes is, so when you think about the concept of anthropology or the understanding of the human person, it's something that oftentimes operates implicitly. You know, people assume things about what it means to be human without necessarily like reflecting on it. It's just something we sort of imbibe from, living in the world. And I guess like thinking to Aquinas, but also the work that you've done on careful nursing, I'd be interested to hear how like you actually practicing medicine and being out in the field, like what's sort of the dominant ways that sometimes medical practitioners approach the human person, and how is something like careful nursing or your work on Aquinas, how is that kind of like challenging maybe assumptions that people have that, are not necessarily ideal ways to think about being human?
That's a good question, Bud. I think as you were describing some of those scenarios, the word virtue popped into my head first. And the second thing that popped into my head was dignity. And so when we think about caring for others, and I mean, of course, I'm caring for others in a nursing role, but anybody in the healthcare field cares for others when they're sick and vulnerable. But then you take that a step back, and we all have an opportunity to care for others, whether we're working in the healthcare field or not. It's our approach to people and how we care for them, and being able to use our virtues to help guide how we treat people and how we care for others, and then thinking about the dignity of our others and ourselves and how we approach people as well, because everybody deserves to be healthy and everybody deserves to be treated when they need help and find that help that they need, and no matter what way it is, even if it's not a cure, even if it's just comfort, or working towards a happy death. That kind of sounds morbid, but not everybody can be healed, so I have to use that word carefully. But I think taking a virtuous approach towards interactions with others, and then thinking about their dignity as we interact with them because of the nature of everybody, and everybody just deserves to be treated with dignity no matter where they come from or who they are.
Yeah, I'm still actually lost in thought about if I've ever actually helped anyone with any of what I've done, but I mostly tear people down. Now, I think, Bud, before you say anything, that there's a philosophical reason for do so. I'm more like a scalpel, Julie. I'm just cutting stuff out. Bud is more like the making people feel better part. No, but in a very serious way, to talk about virtue seems to be an alien thing that we want to talk about. Virtue, we'll go, oh, well, that's what we want, like, our kids to have. So we send them to high school. Hopefully they get a bit of virtue so they don't mouth off, or they get a job and they're nice. Or even in the healthcare system, when you get this sort of talk, people will sort of resign it, to simply bedside manner, right? Like, oh, well, you're being, how do you tell people bad news, or how do you encourage people? But if virtue is a much deeper question and reality about the human person, it starts to be interesting to think about what we mean even by healing. I know when I've taught classes with Bud, especially to nurses, I always try to say that I'm going to relieve them of a big burden, which is to say they don't save anyone, because the fail rate of medicine is 100% because everyone dies. So once you get over the impossible goal that can't be had, you can start talking about the one that can, which is healing, not in the sense of being healed and like fully restored, but even like you said, on a deathbed, healing can take place. Well, but then what's the measure? If it's not, a sort of biophysiological measure, simply, I should say, if it's not simply the idea of being saved or being healed to, what do we mean by being brought back to health? And so philosophically, there's a presumption about what we mean to say you are made whole or brought to health. And for the Catholic medical tradition, and I think this is one of the things you've seen in your research looking at the Sisters of Mercy and how they talked about how we're supposed to interact and understand what it means to be healthy, almost reflexively, maybe. I think that's when in conversations I've had with you, not always explicitly, but at least reflexively, they get down into this deep understanding of human flourishing that is tied to an account of virtue. Now, there's a way in which you can get lost in the weeds talking about virtue for a long time, and all three of us are on the precipice of always being tempted to lose people talking about virtue because it's such a fun topic for us. But suffice it to say, virtue is not simply like sort of a good feeling or a skill or a set of nice practices that you have. Virtue has everything to do with how we use. The very basic response is a rational response to action that we're propelled to do because of our emotional, or the sort of technical term is the passions, that we're making sure to stay between an excess and a deficiency of responding to something like fear. And again, we can get into details that we don't need to get into. But suffice it to say, the idea that when we say we want to be virtuous not only in how we deal with patients, or we want to be virtuous and excellent at how we heal people, but that we're also trying to return or give back a virtue to the patients themselves, I think that gets into the dignity that you're bringing up, and that might be the bridge that people aren't thinking of, or that it doesn't occur to them.
Absolutely. So if you think about being virtuous and you think about the 7 virtues, you've got the cardinal virtues and the theological virtues. An example would be when I talk about dignity, a good example is justice and making sure that there's justice for all of those who deserve to be treated with dignity. Or you think of like fortitude or perseverance as a nurse when you have to speak up for your patient or advocate for them in certain situations, and thinking about those virtues and how you can use those every day to guide your practice and in caring for others. I think just being in touch with those and what they are and what they mean can help you change your lens and how you treat others and care for people. And then to take it a next step, while you're flourishing because you're practicing that way, you're helping your patient flourish because you can bring up those virtues in having them approach how they're healing. And, fortitude and perseverance are 2 big virtues when it comes to trying to improve your health, because without those 2, and of course the theological virtues, of course, but those 2 would be really key in taking the right steps to move forward to make change habits that maybe aren't so healthy or things like that. And so in your own practice of virtuous living, you're helping encourage others to live virtuously and help them flourish as well. And while you're doing that, you're flourishing as a secondary outcome.
Well, and I think when you talk about someone like Aquinas, Bo, you could probably speak to this some, but even in the theological world, you get this idea, well, he's behind the times. So Aquinas had certain assumptions about reality that maybe with scientific discovery we've moved on. And I won't bore our listeners with getting too deeply into that. But we have this idea in our culture very much of capital P progress. And we see ourselves as kind of like the pinnacle of human achievement and knowledge. But I think about something, and maybe Julie, you could speak to this, like end of life care. And if we reduce the human person simply to like parts in motion, because we feel like materialism or data, things that we can quantify, like that's somehow more scientific or more rational, and we cast aside the kind of like virtue conversation that you're talking about. Then sometimes end of life care, the goal can, I think, be just to keep like the blood flowing through the body. And could you maybe speak to like how bringing in some of Thomas's vision, but just like the Catholic understanding of the person in general, can even transform how we think about caring for patients at the end of their life?
Absolutely. So I think that dignity piece comes in again, and understanding how a person sees themselves at the end of life, or how they see their end of life playing out. And sometimes I think people maybe have a wish of a more calm, peaceful end of life, but given some of the ways I've seen things happen in the hospital, because as Bo said, we all think we're trying to save everyone. Things aren't always calm and peaceful. And if a person's wishes in their holistic approach to life, and not just the biological approach to life, includes, different aspects of end-of-life care, we all need to, know what those things are, because we can't provide that dignity that they deserve if we don't know what those wishes are, and then we can't carry them out the way they would like to see them carried out. And I think that's a big conversation for families to have as well, because sometimes it's a scary topic and conversation to have with each other, but it's important to know how we think we want our end of life on earth to look before we hopefully have eternal life. And hopefully all of the things we've done in the meantime have helped us get down that path towards that. But looking at it holistically, Bud, is, I think, really important, just to know what wishes people have and what they believe about end of life, so then we can help them make the choices that they want to make about how life looks as it ends on earth.
Yeah, to make a bad dad philosophical joke, so maybe in some ways the worst type of joke possible, the end of life issues, of course, have to do with the ends of life. See what I did there, bud? So in the Aristotelian sense, right?
Nice.
The word, of course, is telos, right? So that all things, all actions are propelled, all desires even, are propelled towards some end or goal, aim. The word is much more refulgent than we sort of give it credit for. But the idea is to start to ask, any action we do, any knowledge we pursue, any object that we want, there's an end or a goal in which they're done for. And this is called the teleological view in ethics. But it's a sort of very basic point Aristotle makes and Thomas Aquinas picks up on. So in the second half of the show, after we get, like, the break's coming up here pretty soon, we're obviously going to be talking about flourishing, and it's a word that's making a bit of a comeback, but I don't think it's necessarily anchored into its larger context to make more sense of it. But it has everything to do with asking that question, is what is the point, the end, the goal, the aim at which all of these things are going at? Why do I learn to do this one thing? It's almost always for the sake of the other. And all of these things eventually lead to what Aristotle called eudaimonia, or blessedness, or happiness. And so the question starts to be, what is the end or goal even of human life? Like, I am alive, what is the point for? And if I'm alive to keep living, you can start to see, first of all, the philosophical feedback loop and all the problems that would cause. But you would also see how that would make medicine potentially like a huge torturous thing, where we will torture individual humans to keep them alive just to be living. And so if we don't have the space to stop and say, what is the end, the goal, the aim of even being alive, without those questions, we're not going to be able to speak intelligently about what we mean when we try to physically heal people as well. And I think that's what you were getting at on that last comment as well, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you guys talk about healing and that type of thing, when I think of holistic healing, it's, mind, body, spirit. And so while most of us go into a healthcare setting with the hope of biological healing because we have some sort of physical ailment our body is experiencing, and so we seek medical care to relieve us of that ailment. The mental health piece of it doesn't always get addressed because of, the various reasons, the word escaped me. Sorry. But anyway, there's just, not everybody wants to address the mental health side of things because it's scary or unfamiliar.
Right.
And then you've got the emotional, the spirit side of things as well. And that can, for some people, even be scarier to address than mental health issues. And so when we go into care with a holistic approach, and I think that's what's so great about working at a faith-based healthcare facility, is that I can really practice holistic care for people and address all three of those elements. And the healing might not be biologically if I cannot help relieve that physical ailment, but maybe I can help them from a mental health perspective with some healing, or I can help them with an emotional or spiritual piece of healing that maybe needed to be addressed that they didn't even realize when they came in looking for that biological solution. Or maybe it's even their family member. Maybe their family member that accompanied them. Maybe God is using this physical ailment for the person who is sick to help heal holistically the person that's accompanying them from another aspect. And you just never know how your interactions can affect the people around you. And so you have the opportunity to help others heal holistically, no matter how you're interacting with anyone, whether they're the person that's super, biologically sick, or the person sitting next to them who's their support person might have some other mental health or spiritual ailment that you can help with that you don't even realize you're going to have the chance to impact.
Yeah, I think that to answer the question Bud asked a while back, there's a very flattened understanding of what healing and flourishing means in the medical world today, and Thomas Aquinas can precisely give contour to that in a way that we're not sufficiently thinking of. Folks, this is The Uncommon Good. This is great stuff with Julie Weldon. Bo Bonner, Dr. Budmar here with you on this Wednesday on The Uncommon Good. Stick around. We'll be back right after this. Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Budmar joining you this Wednesday here at KWKY Iowa Catholic Radio Studios. Thank you for listening. We have in studio with us our good friend Julie Weldon, Research and Project Manager at Mercy One Population Health, PhD candidate at Iowa University in Nursing, and fellow adjunct professor at Mercy College of Health Sciences. Julie, again, thanks for coming and joining us in studio.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great morning.
So we'll see if we can run that for you, right? We got another segment. No, I'm kidding. So we ended the last segment really getting into what we mean by holistic, right? And there's a way in which if we flatten out what the purpose of medicine is, we miss entire hosts of opportunities for healing. Thomas Aquinas, whose feast was yesterday, whom everyone here on the show really loves, we're trying to explore how his philosophy actually has practical implications for something real and concrete in the world, so how we practice nursing. And that there's a way in which it adds a contour to the understanding of healing that people might not understand otherwise. So we were pointing this out in return, and we keep using the word flourishing. And so I was hoping maybe for the folks out there, if you can, let's try to talk about a definition of what we mean by flourishing, and then we can recapitulate what we've been talking about before.
Yeah, so flourishing, depending on your worldview, Aristotle's definition of flourishing is more towards making choices to live a happy life. And then if you add the Christian worldview on that, like Aquinas did, then it's making choices to live a happy life, so then your final destination is heaven and living an eternal life with God. And so as we think about all of the things we do day in and day out and make choices and in our interactions with people and whatnot, we have opportunities to make steps towards flourishing versus steps that maybe aren't moving us in that direction. And so I think thinking about things from a philosophical perspective, because the philosophy is thinking about thinking. And when you think about flourishing and how it impacts the choices that you make as an end goal, I think it kind of changes your lens a little bit when you think about what choices you're making and why you might be making those choices and what the end goal really is.
Julie, last week on the show, Bo and I talked some about the biblical admonition to be in the world but not of the world. And I know the healthcare field today in America is really complex. There's a lot of different dynamics and even you could say like pressures at play for I know people entering the field. I'm just kind of curious, like broadly speaking, with your career, both teaching and practicing, have you found like resistance to some of the ideas that are really important to you, or in what ways do you think you being like a Catholic nurse, a nurse who is Catholic, maybe sets you apart or makes you stand out in the healthcare field?
That's an interesting question, Bud. So I really have two answers that popped into my head as you asked me that. My upbringing, as I grew up, obviously was a Catholic upbringing, and then my schooling happened to also be in the Catholic context, and I was impacted by the Sisters of Mercy throughout my schooling, my elementary schooling, my college, my undergraduate degree was impacted by the Sisters of Mercy, and so receiving education from that perspective has really shaped how I have developed to the nurse I am today. And then moving into my career at Mercy One, and I just celebrated my 25th anniversary. I can't believe I've been there for 25 years.
I can't believe you're 25, Julie. So that's amazing. So.
But working in that environment has allowed my approach to nursing and approach to healthcare continue to, we'll just use the word flourish in a way that I think has been different if I had chose to work in a non-faith-based facility because of the latitude I have to help address certain issues with patients and their families, and I can feel good about those things myself and not feel like I can't be myself or address certain issues because I'm in a particular type of environment where it might be frowned upon to address certain issues, or, just even like pray with a patient. We hear about prayer in schools and things like that. Well, I never worry about that on the day-to-day. We have prayer set overhead twice a day at the hospital. So I think there's a lot of pressure, depending on what healthcare environment you're in, to get back to your question, Bud. There are a lot of pressures to behave a certain way and to practice a certain way, but in my experience and with the development of my career and where I've been practicing, I feel like I can practice in such a way that helps me move towards flourishing and helps the patients that I impact move towards flourishing from more of an Aquinas view than a worldly view or an Aristotle view.
Yeah, Julie, everything when you talk to us, you embody that upbringing and like what you care about so much. And I think anybody who interacts with you, it's easy to see. Bud and I got a message on the Zipwhip line that shows what we embody, which is, I like the social teaching, but I stay for all the food references. A little game I like to play while listening to your show is how long it will take Bud to make a food reference. So, for instance, when people talk to you, they go like hope and flourishing, but like for us, it's mostly food references. No, I'm kidding.
Well, flourishing is impacted by your food.
I wanted to shout out to the person who wrote that on the Zipwood line. That was great. But very seriously, it's obvious about like why this like matters to you so much, and that's why it's always a delight to talk to you about that. And I would say the further thing then is it's interesting for people to know why it is that in your PhD study that what you're talking about is careful nursing specifically, and what that has to do with the Sisters of Mercy. So if you don't have to go into the whole thing about like why you decided to go get a PhD and things like this, but why is it that this careful nursing and Sisters of Mercy come up in your research?
Well, in my many academic years and all the reading I've done, there are lots of different theoretical approaches to nursing and different practice models and whatnot. And as I've read about all those different those scholarly nurses and their take on how to practice and how to care for patients and what kind of outcomes we need we hope our patients have. The one that has resonated with me the most is careful nursing, and how the Sisters of Mercy encouraged us to practice nursing, as they, for over the past 200 years, have helped shape healthcare in general and health systems with all the different entities that they've impacted by creating different ways to provide healthcare services. And so as I move forward with my research and how I can impact practice, or how practice is impacted to be better for the nurse, and then how that impacts the patient and the family, I just really like the way that the sisters incorporated the philosophical and theological teachings of Thomas Aquinas into their practice, because it seems a natural fit to me, and it helps me keep in mind the holistic approach that I want to have, and gives me that latitude to practice that way to help patients flourish, and then in turn, hopefully I flourish a little bit as well. So I really wanted to incorporate, and then it also, I think, gives honor to my upbringing, because I've been impacted by the sisters so much in my upbringing too, and where I work, that I can help continue to promote the way that they've encouraged us to practice, and give them the credit that they deserve for the impact that they've had on the healthcare system in general.
Julie, I know we've talked about this topic on the show in the past, but I think it's a history that can be worth rehashing. And for many of our listeners, they may not fully realize the presence of the Sisters of Mercy in Des Moines. Could you speak briefly to how Catherine McCauley and the Sisters of Mercy first got into nursing and what we consider healthcare today, and then maybe some about the connection to them coming to Iowa?
Sure. So Catherine McCauley really got her start in healthcare in the early 1800s, when her family became sick with cholera. And she herself was not a nurse at the time. They did not have nursing schools in Ireland. Those didn't appear until about 1893. And so she practiced for about 20 years in healthcare without formal nurses training. And she just had her influences from the Irish Sisters of Charity in Dublin that were working at St. Vincent's Hospital, and learned from her physician friends that she knew from her social circles. And you fast forward to the middle of the 1800s, when the Crimea War breaks out, and a lot of nurses have emulate Florence Nightingale, and she's considered the grandmother of nursing. Well, a lot of people don't know that Florence needed more help in running the British War Hospital. And so she asked for more resources, and the British War Office could not provide those for her. So she called on the Sisters of Mercy to come and help her care for the British soldiers and injured and sick in the war zone. And 17 sisters came to help her out. And those sisters then impacted each other and impacted Florence and her team of nurses, and there was a lot of collaborating going on, and that's where the name careful nursing arises from, is the type of nursing that they were providing the soldiers at that time, and they called it careful nursing. And then you fast forward another 50 years, and the physicians that were practicing in Des Moines did not have a hospital yet here in Des Moines. They were, going house to house, practicing medicine the way they used to, and they knew they needed an acute care facility. And so they reached out to the bishop, and the bishop then reached out to the sisters and said, we know of your reputation, we know of your history, and we would like you to come to Des Moines and help us build a hospital and help us establish acute care in Des Moines. And so that's how the first hospital in Des Moines was developed. The sisters came along in 1893 and started practicing out of the Sherman Hill residence while they were building the hospital. That's on the corner of 6th and University. That was the original location, and obviously it's still standing there today. Changed a little bit over the 125 years, but that's how the sisters ended up in Des Moines, is through a request from the physicians to help them build a hospital and set up acute care in the city of Des Moines because it was so badly needed.
Yeah, and one of the things that is interesting about how that history works that then folds back into what we've been talking about with Thomas Aquinas is when medicine starts to make its big push into our lives, and sort of like all these hospitals get built, the sort of technology sort of matches in some ways the natural capacity about like what we're doing is carrying, and I don't think like we're saying like it's 1911 and people would necessarily be using flourishing or like talking about it in many ways like we do now, because so much of what healing was presence and being there and realizing that there was only so much that we could do, and sort of in a very almost connatural way exhibited a lot of what we're needing to on purpose now go back and find. And the reason is because the technology, while nearly miraculous in its ability and its capacity to do things for the biological human, like the bodies that we have, can give us a sense of power that we don't still have. So it's one thing to say that we can transplant hearts and make people survive in ways that we never thought they could. But we still all face the fact of the brokenness of the lives we have, and that also that they end in the end. And so a lot of the flattening of understanding what human flourishing is sort of a consequence of our own successes. People take it for granted that there's just going to be hospitals where it used to be this massive undertaking of resources and effort. The Sisters of Mercy had to come from Ireland, essentially, to come make hospitals throughout the middle of the United States. The fact that, we have multiple hospitals to choose from, the Des Moines area, for instance, we begin to think of the sort of technological power and artifice as something that itself just kind of appears. And when we don't, when some of this stuff comes easy, it's not like what I'm saying is like, man, I wish more people died of curable diseases because we didn't know about germ theory and washing our hands. But it's something that what falls to people like you who are doing this research in nursing is to dig back deeply into these wells to say these are lessons that are easy to forget because of how well we've gotten in other aspects of the field. And so flourishing can seem like either it's too basic or it's too esoteric. And, we have people in emergency rooms. Why are you taking time to care about these things? But if we don't take the time to ask the most basic questions about what does it mean to flourish as a human, our successes in other places are going to be the source of further failures. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's both what Careful Nursing and the Sisters of Mercy, the history that you've been on the show to talk about before, and I know that if people found you in the street and asked you to talk about Sisters of Mercy and Careful Nursing, you would do that because you feel convicted, right? And so how that and something like the philosophy of Thomas Aquinas is so pressing today is actually because of the successes we've had elsewhere can make us forget the most basic things we need to keep in mind.
Right. The technological advances really only address the biological piece. And, I mentioned before, holistic is mind, body, spirit. And so really the technological advances for the body are way too many to count. But when you go to the mind and the spirit, the only technological advances I can think of when it comes to the mind, there are a few procedures you can do to help with mental health issues. There's, of course, medications you can use to help with mental health issues. But some of that, too, is just basic human touch and addressing human nature. And there are no technological advances for those kinds of things. And so to get back to the basics and get back to the core of who we are as children of God and how we need to respect the dignity of others and address those mind and spirit issues that they're having, they might be in the emergency room, and we all think we need to start throwing our technological advances at them to help them with whatever brought them to the emergency room. But a lot of times we don't always know. It could have been a mind or a spirit issue that could have started the cascade of the biological issues that they're experiencing. And so to get to the core of what's really the problem, that's why it's so important to be holistic. And the sisters really, truly allowed you to do that because of the spirit element. A lot of nursing theories and models talk about being holistic, but then when you read through the details, you don't read about spirituality. And the sisters really believed in the importance of that. And obviously St. Thomas influenced that. So I think that's why it's so important for us to be aware of another way to think about practicing nursing and just practicing healthcare in general, and how that impacts the people we serve in the ministry.
I think that makes sense talking about with virtue as well, because again, virtue is not just do the right thing or like have the right thoughts. If you bear down into the actual theory, virtue theory takes seriously that our body embodied life, like living in the world and the perceptions that we have, that then register in what we would call an emotional way, but like sort of like the passions, right? Like fear, these basic drives that come about in our interaction with the world and can stem from the body, right? Like the fact that Thomas Aquinas didn't realize that there were things like pituitary glands and stuff would not faze him, because he'd go like, of course, the body would have these sort of symptomatic responses to the world that would then those things had to arise somewhere. I think he'd be unfazed and be like, oh, good, we figured out where they're coming from. But that very embodied existence in the perceptive world then immediately occasions a rational response, or not, I mean, like our capacity to reason, the spiritual life, virtue, by accounting for the ethical life in terms that are embodied, hylomorphic, both body and soul, and irreducibly so, already starts to make an understanding of ethical life that is more holistic, like you're talking about. And then when we even start to talk about a communal way, so there's individual flourishing, but then of course there's communal flourishing as well, and the sort of embodied life that we share. One of my favorite someone writing on Thomas is Dennis Turner, and he had a chapter of his book where he kind of went sort of overboard to make a point, and he said Thomas Aquinas, the materialist, not of course because Thomas doesn't believe in the Spirit, but that Thomas, for his day and age, so remarkably talked about the embodiedness of the body and our sort of life in it, that it's not this dualistic thing of two competing aspects, but this unified whole, that you can't talk about bodily health without talking about spiritual and mental health, and vice versa. And Thomas is talking about this in the 1200s. And so it makes sense that people who would follow him, like the Sisters of Mercy, would be able to show that sort of reality. Mm-hmm. Julie, we ran out of time. It's so wonderful to have you, and we hope to have you back. And, of course, we wish you not only good work, but press you on to keep researching all this, because the medical field needs it so much. So Julie Weldon, Research and Project Manager at Mercy One Population Health, PhD candidate at Iowa University in Nursing, and fellow adjunct professor at Mercy College of Health Sciences. Julie, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Bud. I hope to see you soon.
Shots fired, Bud. You got to make it here soon. Come on. What are you doing? You don't even have snow. You don't even have a broken tailbone. This is The Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, our families, our city, our state, the nation, the entire world, solar system, galaxies, the whole kit and caboodle. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one, and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.